In the winter of 1839, a fleet of British warships sat anchored off the coast of southern China, their cannons pointed at a nation that had, until that moment, considered itself the center of the civilized world. The reason for war was not gold, not territory in the traditional sense, not even religion. The reason was a leaf, a small, curled, unassuming leaf that Chinese farmers had been quietly cultivating for over 1,000 years. Empires would soon rise and fall over it. Fortunes would be built and destroyed by it. Wars would be fought and revolutions ignited, all because of a drink that most people today pour without a second thought. This is the story of tea, and it begins not with an empire, but with a single fallen leaf drifting into a pot of boiling water nearly 5,000 years ago. Legend places us in the gardens of a Chinese emperor named Shennong, a mythical ruler credited with teaching his people agriculture and medicine. The story goes that Shennong insisted his drinking water be boiled for purity, and one afternoon, resting beneath a wild tea tree, a gust of wind carried a few leaves into his pot. The water turned a soft amber color. Curious, he tasted it, and something inside him seemed to awaken. He called it a gift from heaven. It is a beautiful story, and like so many origin myths, it is almost certainly not literal history. But myths are rarely meaningless. They are memories wearing costumes. And this particular myth points towards something archaeologists have since confirmed through careful excavation. Tea drinking in China is extraordinarily old, likely stretching back over 4,000 years, hidden in the misty mountains of what is now Yunnan province, where wild tea trees still grow today, some of them centuries old, gnarled and quiet witnesses to a story most of the world has never fully understood. For most of its early life, tea was not a pleasure, it was medicine. Ancient Chinese physicians recorded it as a remedy for fatigue, for digestive trouble, for clouded thinking. It was bitter, often boiled with ginger, orange peel, or salt, closer to a thick medicinal broth than the delicate infusion we recognize now. It would take centuries, and the rise of one of history's most sophisticated civilizations, before tea transformed into something else entirely, something spiritual, something artistic, something that could unite an empire. That transformation happened during the Tang dynasty, a golden age of Chinese culture that began in the 7th century, a time of poetry, painting, and unprecedented prosperity. It was during this era that a man named Lu Yu, an orphan raised in a Buddhist monastery, became so obsessed with the preparation and philosophy of tea that he wrote an entire book about it. He called it the Che Jing, or the Classic of Tea, and it remains to this day one of the most extraordinary documents in the history of food and drink. Lu Yu did not simply describe how to brew tea. He elevated it into a discipline, almost a form of meditation, discussing the exact quality of water, the shape of the cups, the sound the water should make as it approached boiling. To Lu Yu, tea was not a beverage. It was a mirror for the soul. And once this idea took hold in Chinese society, it never let go. Buddhist monks became tea's greatest early ambassadors. In quiet monasteries carved into mountainsides, monks used tea to stay alert during long hours of meditation, believing its clarity of mind mirrored spiritual clarity. As Buddhism spread across Asia, so did tea, following pilgrims and monks along trade routes into Korea, and eventually across the sea into Japan. What happened next is one of history's most remarkable cultural transformations. In Japan, tea did not simply arrive, it was reborn. Japanese monks, particularly a monk named Izai in the 12th century, brought tea seeds back from China and began cultivating them with religious devotion. Over the following centuries, this humble drink evolved into the Japanese tea ceremony, chanoyu, an elaborate, almost sacred ritual involving precise movements, seasonal awareness, and profound respect for simplicity and imperfection. To witness a true Japanese tea ceremony is to witness centuries of philosophy distilled into a single cup, and it all traces back to a handful of leaves carried across the sea by men seeking enlightenment, not empire. But empire inevitably was coming. For nearly 2,000 years, the secret of tea remained locked almost entirely within Asia. China guarded its cultivation techniques fiercely, understanding, perhaps instinctively, the value of what it possessed. Meanwhile, in Europe, an entire continent lived in complete ignorance of tea's existence. There were no teacups in medieval castles, no tea gardens in Renaissance courtyards. For most of European history, tea simply did not exist. That silence would not last forever, and when it finally broke, it would break the world along with it. The first fragile threads connecting East and West appeared through Portuguese traders and missionaries in the 16th century, who encountered tea in China and sent curious reports home. But it was the Dutch with their formidable trading fleets who first brought tea to Europe in meaningful quantities during the early 1600s. At first, it was treated as an exotic curiosity, absurdly expensive, available only to the wealthiest aristocrats, who displayed their imported tea sets almost like trophies. Few could have predicted that within a century, this strange bitter Asian leaf would become so essential to a nation that its loss would trigger riots, revolutions, and the birth of one of the largest corporations the world has ever known. That nation was Britain, and its relationship with tea would become one of the most consequential love affairs in human history. Tea entered English society gradually at first, through the court of King Charles II and his Portuguese wife, Catherine of Braganza, who was already a devoted tea drinker before she ever set foot in England. Slowly, tea rooms and later coffee houses began serving it to London's elite. But its true transformation came through the hands of the British East India Company, a private trading corporation that would grow so powerful it eventually commanded its own army, larger than many European nations, and effectively ruled vast stretches of India. The East India Company recognized something extraordinary in tea. It was not simply a commodity, it was a habit, and habits once formed become nearly impossible to break. By the 18th century, tea had descended from royal palaces into ordinary British homes, and something remarkable happened. It became democratic. Unlike wine or expensive spirits, a simple cup of tea, even a weak one shared among family, offered warmth and comfort to the poorest laborer and the wealthiest lord alike. Tea time became a ritual stitched into the very rhythm of British daily life, and in doing so, it created a demand so massive that Britain found itself dependent on a foreign nation, China, for a product it could not grow on its own soil, in a trade relationship that was becoming dangerously unbalanced. Here is where the story darkens. China had little interest in British goods. The Chinese economy was largely self-sufficient, and the Qing dynasty restricted foreign trade tightly, permitting European merchants to operate only through the single port city of Canton. Britain paid for its tea almost entirely in silver, and that silver was draining out of the British economy at an alarming rate. Faced with this crisis, the East India Company turned to something far more sinister to balance the books. Opium grown in British-controlled India, opium was smuggled into China in staggering quantities, creating widespread addiction and social devastation. When Chinese officials attempted to halt the opium trade, seizing and destroying massive stockpiles in 1839, Britain responded not with negotiation, but with warships. The result was the First Opium War, a conflict born almost entirely from the world's thirst for tea and Britain's desperate need to pay for it. China's defeat forced open new ports, ceded Hong Kong to British control, and marked a profound wound in Chinese history that many historians consider the beginning of what China itself calls the century of humiliation, all of it traced back to leaves in a teapot. Britain, however, was determined never again to depend on China for something so essential to its economy and identity, and so began one of history's most audacious acts of industrial espionage. In the 1840s, a Scottish botanist named Robert Fortune, funded by the East India Company, disguised himself in Chinese clothing, shaved part of his head in the traditional Manchu style, and traveled deep into regions of China forbidden to foreigners. His mission was almost unbelievable in its audacity: steal the secrets of tea cultivation and processing that China had guarded for millennia, and smuggle both the knowledge and the plants themselves out of the country. Fortune succeeded. He transported tens of thousands of tea plants and seedlings, along with skilled Chinese tea workers, to British-controlled India, where the East India Company had already discovered something extraordinary. Wild tea plants, a distinct variety from the Chinese species, were growing naturally in the remote jungles of Assam. Combining stolen Chinese expertise with these native Indian plants, Britain built a tea empire of its own, transforming the landscapes of Assam and later Darjeeling and Ceylon into vast colonial plantations. This new empire came at a devastating human cost. Indian and Sri Lankan laborers, many working under conditions barely distinguishable from slavery, cleared forests, planted fields, and picked leaves under brutal quotas. for wages that kept them locked in permanent poverty. The elegant porcelain teacups of Victorian drawing rooms were filled with a drink whose true cost was paid in the exhausted hands of workers thousands of miles away, workers whose names history rarely bothered to record. It is one of history's cruelest patterns that the objects representing comfort and civility in one corner of the world so often represent suffering and exploitation in another. And tea's political power did not stop at the borders of Asia and Europe. It crossed an entire ocean and helped ignite a revolution. By the 1770s, tea had become deeply embedded in colonial American life, imported almost entirely through British channels and taxed accordingly. When the British government granted the East India Company a monopoly on tea sales to the American colonies, while maintaining a tax that colonists had never consented to, resentment reached a boiling point. On a cold December night in 1773, a group of colonists, thinly disguised as Mohawk warriors, boarded 3 British ships docked in Boston Harbor and dumped over 300 crates of tea into the icy water below. The Boston Tea Party was not simply a protest about a beverage. It was a declaration that a distant government could not tax a people without their consent, and it became one of the sparks that ignited the American Revolution. To this day, historians debate the deeper economic and political currents behind that night, but one fact remains undeniable: a nation was born, in part, from a rebellion over tea. Through all of this turmoil, war, colonization, revolution, tea's quieter identity persisted. It remained in kitchens and temples and monasteries far from the battlefields, exactly what it had always been: a moment of stillness, a ritual of care. In Morocco, sweet mint tea became a symbol of hospitality, poured from great height in an elegant ceremonial pour. In Russia, the ornate samovar became the beating heart of family gatherings, keeping tea perpetually warm through long winters. In Britain itself, afternoon tea evolved into an institution of its own, credited to Anna, the Duchess of Bedford, who, feeling a hunger pang in the long gap between lunch and dinner in the 1840s, began requesting tea and light snacks be brought to her room, a personal habit that quietly transformed into a national tradition. Modern science, centuries later, would finally begin investigating what ancient physicians had long claimed instinctively. Tea, particularly green and black tea derived from the same Camellia sinensis plant, contains powerful natural compounds called catechins and flavonoids, which function as antioxidants within the body. Some research suggests these compounds may support cardiovascular health and help protect cells from oxidative stress, while tea's naturally occurring caffeine, combined with an amino acid called L-theanine, appears to produce a distinct kind of calm alertness, different from the jittery energy of coffee. However, responsible modern research is careful and measured. Tea is not a miracle cure, and many popular claims about dramatic weight loss or disease prevention remain unproven or overstated. What science does support is more modest, and perhaps more honest: that tea, enjoyed as part of a balanced life, appears to offer genuine, if incremental, benefits, a scientific echo of what ancient monks and physicians sensed through observation and experience alone, centuries before laboratories existed to confirm it. Today, tea is the most widely consumed beverage on Earth after water itself. Billions of cups are poured every single day, from delicate porcelain in Kyoto tea houses to plastic cups on construction sites in Sao Paulo to steel tumblers in the crowded chai stalls of Mumbai, where masala chai, spiced and sweetened, has become a daily ritual for hundreds of millions of people. The plant that once grew wild and unnoticed in the misty mountains of ancient China now touches nearly every culture, every continent, every kind of human life imaginable. And yet, for something so universal, so deeply woven into daily human existence, most people who lift a teacup to their lips have no idea what they are actually holding. They do not know they are holding the residue of ancient monasteries and ferocious wars, of stolen secrets and stolen labor, of revolutions launched and empires enriched. They do not know that a single leaf helped tear open China's borders, helped birth the United States, helped build and sustain the largest empire the modern world has ever seen. There is something quietly staggering about that. A 5,000-year-old habit, born from an accident beneath a wild tree, has shaped the geopolitical map of our entire planet, and it continues to do so today, in the tea fields of Kenya, in the trade negotiations of modern nations, in the quiet, unremarkable ritual millions of us perform without a second thought each morning. Perhaps that is the truest lesson tea has to offer, buried far beneath its warmth and its bitterness. History is rarely made only by kings signing treaties or armies marching into battle. Sometimes history is made by something as small as ordinary, as a single leaf falling into a pot of boiling water, carried forward for thousands of years by human hands that never fully understood the empire they were building, one quiet cup at a time.